On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Vineeth Loganathan. He is the Director of Machine Learning at ViralGains. We're going to be talking about building out your program, right? So obviously you have to have a vision, you have to have some steps involved. Data and delivering value is one of the main things every data leader is involved in. And I think Vineeth has kind of gone through that as his role in ViralGains is new. And we're really excited to see him share some of that with us. And I think we're going to really try to see, how does he find that balance to deliver value with data? Because there's always that notion of short-term, medium-term, long-term, but yet those data needs do not stop. Vineeth, excited to have you on the show.
Likewise. Thank you, Amir. It's great to be on the show.
Awesome. All right. Before we dive in, tell us, what does ViralGains do?
Yeah. So ViralGains is a marketing tech company. And what we have is this idea called using zero-party data for ads. So think of the world of marketing, right? There's first-party data where like you as a company is collecting data. So think of Amazons of the world, Googles of the world. You search a query, they get data on what you're searching for. And then there's third-party data where data providers give you access to data that can be used to target you for marketing. Zero-party data is this idea that customers are voluntarily sharing information with you. So you might have seen surveys in YouTube, surveys in Instagram, where ask you questions about, hey, are you interested in cars? Are you interested in shoes? So a customer is voluntarily sharing that information. So ViralGains gathers zero-party data in the open web. So we're not particularly tied to any one platform. Like we're not just in Google, we're not just in Amazon, we're not just in Facebook. In the open web, we ask questions, we gather zero-party data. And using that data, we train machine learning models to scale that audience up. Because, for example, like survey responses are pretty low number, and that's not enough to make an audience. But what we do is we train machine learning models to find what we call voice-alike customers. So customers who are similar to someone who said, I'm interested in cars. Let's find everyone else who's interested in cars in the open web, and that becomes an audience. So we're a zero-party data audience marketplace, if you will. The idea is to let customers share what they're interested in and using that data to build audiences.
Awesome. I guess people can obviously go on your LinkedIn, but you've joined the company pretty recently, and part of the reason you're on board is to help build out those type of data capabilities that seemingly would be a great fit for ViralGains. And I guess we talked about, obviously you're trying to deliver value. I think every data leader I've ever spoken to is focused on delivering value. And it is a challenge, as we kind of talked about, because you're not always able to deliver that immediate win, because you do have to put in some plans in place, and stakeholders are not always excited to be patient because they have needs. In your case, maybe tell us a little bit, high level. You're now there, a couple of months. You'd mentioned you're trying to make that 3-year vision, that case for it, kind of the needs for the company. And as you are new and you've had time to kind of assess and put that plan together, what was that process like for you? Because you obviously have to ramp up on, some of the company internals and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I think when we think about delivering value with data, right? Generally, data science teams have this reputation that like we go hide in dark rooms, work on something for 6 months, pop our heads out every 6 months and say, we're still working on it, be patient. And then we go back into our dark rooms, continue tinkering on stuff. Data science teams tend to have this reputation. And the way to overcome that is, the way I think about it is like exactly like you said, there's like short-term, medium-term, long-term plans, right? There are things that are urgent that need immediate action. So if there's a sales call tomorrow for a client and they need a bunch of reports to talk to them about, you cannot tell them to wait 3 months. Like that's just not going to happen. So we need to set up the team in a way that we're enabling immediate success for people who depend on this data, right? Like staffing the team to build dashboards, build reporting tools, build automations, so that these teams that are having frontline conversations are depending on a data team to write a bunch of queries, pull some reports, put some tech together. That's a long turnaround, right? So enabling frontline teams to have access to good, high quality data should be sort of the baseline. So set that up first. That should be the first thing we do. And then medium term, start thinking about, okay, now that we have the baseline in place, what do we do next? How do we derive more value out of the data? And that's when you start thinking about sort of going from this notion of quick ad hoc reports to auto-generated, pushed out reports, right? Like you send them every week. Hey, here's how all your accounts are doing. Here's how all the like sort of automations. Here's like sort of low-hanging fruits on your account. Here's where we're seeing opportunities. So automation for quick insights, if you will, right? Like don't expect them to go through 10 pages of dashboards to find that one nugget of information. Give them that nugget of information that is useful, right? And then more long-term is closing the loop on this whole system, right? Like we gave you this insight, you used that insight, you took some action. What is the outcome that action drove, right? Like that's the closing of the loop. So that is where I think a lot of this idea of using machine learning to identify the relationship between actions to outcomes, right? Like using machine learning experimentation and inference sort of methods to understand what is the relationship between action and outcome, and sort of like closing the loop, closing the entire loop. That I think is like should be the long-term goal. And when you go through this process, the first thing is to make sure that the stakeholders aren't blocked, right? So unblocking the stakeholders, or like sort of proving your value as a data team, right? Like at the end of the day, data teams are there to help generate more revenue or save costs. Like there's only two things the data teams are here to do. You either make the company more money or you save the company more money. And you have to prove your value before you can ask for, I need $1 million to go build this thing, right? Like before you do that, you have to prove why the $1 million invested in the data team actually delivers more than $1 million of value. And you do that by actually showcasing what your capabilities are.
I like that. I like that. There's a few steps to trying to build that plan and that vision out. I guess maybe let's start at the top. So you kind of talked about that the basic, the fundamentals. So obviously, as you want to deliver more complex, complete solutions, you need the fundamentals in place. When you're sitting down with a stakeholder who's obviously envisioning a lot of more advanced capabilities, and you're evaluating those fundamentals to make sure things are in place, how does that conversation go? Because it might not be what they want to hear, that, hey, before we learn how to sprint, we might have to really just basically learn how to crawl.
Yeah. So in conversations like that, I think it's important to understand. I call this the question behind the question. Okay, you want this cool thing. What do you want that cool thing to do, right? It's especially with generative AI. I think there's a lot of value to be unlocked using generative AI, no doubt about it, right? Like it's been, in my opinion, a step function change in productivity of teams across the board, like marketing teams, sales teams, customer success teams, data teams. There's no software engineering teams. There's like no part of the organization where generative AI is not delivering productivity gains. But when a stakeholder comes and says, hey, you know what would be cool? Like a generative AI tool that automatically does this. And then you ask them why. Like, why do you want this to be automatically done? Then they tell you, this is the problem we're facing. This is where we're stuck. This is where we think we could use some help. So trying to understand instead of being like hammer that looks for a nail, right? Like try to find what the problem is, and then try to understand, okay, what is the quickest, lowest hanging fruit way of addressing this problem, right? Like, okay, if I just do this one thing, we solve 80% of your problem. And that's going to take me and my team 3 weeks of work. But if you want this super cool, fully automated chatbot way of like, you want to just like speak to a speaker, ask for insights, and the speaker responds back with insights, I'm going to need like 3 years and 30 people to build this, right? Like that's the 100% solution. That would be cool, but I need 3 years and 30 people. Or I could just do this thing where like there's a bunch of series of automations that we can do in like 4 weeks that gets you 80% of the way there, right? Like, so trying to understand what is the problem and trying to find out the shortest path to addressing, let's say, 80% of that problem, right? And that's the way I would approach it, essentially.
As you're putting in, as we're kind of talked about, especially at a younger company, company trying to build out capabilities, even a legacy company that's trying to build out capabilities, those fundamentals that you're looking for to be the building blocks so that you can deliver those advanced capabilities, what are some of those fundamentals that need to be put in place?
Yes, that's a great question. So I've seen this both in like the really small younger companies like ViralGains, and I've also spent time at team companies like Microsoft and Airbnb, and I've noticed this everywhere, right? Like The first thing is in one of my previous teams, like one of the VPs of product, she joked that we don't have an accounting problem, we have a counting problem. It was so bad that three different teams would report three different numbers saying for the exact same thing. So, like, let's say there's a metric that says how many users took action A, right? Like some random action thing, it could be anything. Define that action to be whatever you want it to be. There are three different teams that are responsible for this, and three different teams are saying three different numbers that are not even in the same ballpark, right? So it's so making sure that you have to get to a common understanding of what your definitions of metrics are. I think that's like the first step. What is your definition of this metric? If you're saying a user is churned, what is your definition? Let's say someone says, oh, if they haven't done any action in 10 days, they're churned. And someone else says they haven't done an action in 30 days, they're churned. And then someone else says they haven't done an action in a year, they're churned. And they're all calling it churn. And these three different churn numbers are like bubbling up to different teams. And then there's not even a common understanding of what churn means. So define very clearly what that metric means, and then work backwards from the metric and see where are we collecting this data, where are we gathering this data, are we missing any data, are we ignoring, let's say, a part of the pipeline. So making sure that the data that is feeding this metric is of high quality, right? Like you do that by doing some automated data quality checks, making sure that the data that is feeding this metric is of high quality. Then you start reporting on this number and like get everybody in a room and say, this is what we're going to use as the definition of churn. Do you all agree? And then let's say that everybody is on board. Then you start measuring it. Then you start deploying it. Then you start using that metric to take action. Now we see churns down or up week over week. How do we address this? And then you go find the root cause of what caused it, try to improve, right? So the first step really, and this has happened, like mature organizations, young organizations, there is no place where this hasn't happened. So first things first is to get to a common understanding of a definition of what the numbers you are saying actually mean. And even that takes careful thought, clear data pipelining, clear definitions of metrics. And these definitions should live in a central place, right? Like where anybody in the company can go and say, okay, what is churn? And then they go find the churn metric. And then along with the metric, they find a definition that says anyone who hasn't taken any action on the site in 30 days is considered churn. Like everybody should have access to the definition, should have access to where that definition came from and what that metric is. So I think that's the first step, really.
I like that. And I guess as you're, if you can kind of envision future solutions, you're obviously doing that. You're talking about, hey, we need common definitions. We need to make sure the fundamentals are put in place. I guess in your job as a director of machine learning, you have been at other companies, Airbnb, Microsoft, and Amazon. You've built pretty elaborate systems and solutions. As you're kind of building that roadmap into your mind and you're looking at the fundamentals and you're planning step 2 in the process or future steps in the maturity, process, are you starting to plan out some of those moves going, well, if we're going to apply some NLP or we're going to look at some opportunities to automate some basic repeatable tasks, I'm going to need these components. So I might as well factor that in.
Totally. So I think with data science, especially in machine learning, the path to actual business impact is actually longer than people generally anticipate. The reason is a lot of models will show improvements when you run them offline, but when you deploy the model online, especially if you have a system that where you can assuming there's a robust experimentation system where you can compare, okay, here's the baseline, here's the machine learning version of this system that we're trying to improve. A lot of times, the first iteration may not even show significant improvements on the outcomes you're trying to drive. Then it's a question of going back to the drawing board, finding out, okay, are there subsegments where it's working? Are there subsegments where it's underperforming? Find out why. There may be like data quality issues. There may be like the way we train the model. There may have been like leakage, right? Like data leakage when you train. So there's so many things that could go wrong in going from an idea to actually delivering business value using machine learning, that you have to factor in. Through this process, you might identify, oh, actually, this data source that we were using, we're aggregating it like this, and we should have used the raw data instead of the aggregated data, right? Which means you need to go one step back in the pipeline, start pulling that data, feeding that to the model. So you have to have bandwidth allocated to make data quality improvements as you go, as you investigate and find issues in the model, right? So it's it has to be baked in. So if you talk to your team of machine learning engineers and say, hey, here's my problem. Here's how we're planning to solve it. Think of the steps, right? Like data acquisition, model training, validation, testing, deployment, testing live, right? Like in this stage, you ask them for an estimate. They'll give you, okay, we can do like train, test, deploy, train, test, validate, deploy will take, let's say, 2 months. But then you have to anticipate that there's some data quality issue, and you go back to the data engineering team and say, hey, actually, we need this other pipeline. And data engineering team may be on their own schedule, right? They have their own priorities. So now you have to factor that in. So it's always important to clarify things upfront to your stakeholders that the lead time for impact on any machine learning project is pretty long. Like you cannot just train, test, deploy, find value in the first iteration. It takes multiple iterations, which include data quality improvements. So you have to factor that time in while you make plans and communicate that very early with stakeholders so that the expectations are set correctly, right? So like even in steps 2, even in step 3, throughout these steps, you will still identify issues upstream that you will have to fix while you're building it. It's sort of like the image of the old sort of comic image of someone sitting on a train and like fixing the tracks as the train is moving. That's how it feels when you're trying to deliver like value with machine learning, business value with machine learning. Like while your model's being developed, you identify 10 more issues that you need to go back and fix. It's an iterative process for sure.
Absolutely. I guess something that came to mind as you're explaining that was, as you're building out more capabilities and you're introducing the need for new skills to the company, right? You might need other roles, other people to deliver these solutions. Maybe stakeholders aren't quite aware of those new roles, those new budget requirements, because obviously if you want machine learning, that has other components to it. You have other ops constraints. There's other, the pieces that kind of fit into the solution. When you're talking about budgets against, this longer term roadmap and vision of getting to more advanced capabilities, how do you set the expectation to make sure nobody gets sticker shock down the road?
So thankfully at like ViralGains, at least I haven't had this issue where like we've had a pretty solid engineering team that's also built production grade ML systems. So the change really isn't like a step function of I need 10 more machine learning engineers to actually make this work. We already have an engineering team that's already deployed models in productions, the models that are working, generating value. So it hasn't been an issue here. But I have seen this happen in other places where business leaders come to the science teams and say, this would be cool. And then we go back to them and say, hey, our team is already staffed to do these 10 things. If you want the next 10 things, we need to staff up with more machine learning engineering, more data engineering. Like it's not just one thing, right? Like like I said, this whole system that requires more work to continue delivering value. So then the question becomes, do we drop one of the 10 things that we're already doing to do this next thing? Or do we hire incremental headcount because we truly believe in? So that's where it is very important for like the data leaders and the business leaders to sit together and figure out, sort of stack ranking them based on effort to outcome, right? Like how much effort is this going to be and what is the expected outcome? Again, they're very sort of hand wavy. They're like not super scientific, but we try to make it as scientific as we can, sort of like have some baselines for believing in some values. And maybe there are some past projects where you can drive value from. And if you come from a company where there's like a history of experimentation, you can basically point to it and say, we run these 10 experiments. This is how much value we derived of those experiments. This is what we believe is like a reasonable ballpark figure for the value that you can derive out of this project. Then you stack rank them and then say, okay, the bottom one with like the highest ratio of effort to outcome goes out, right? Like it's a constant prioritization exercise, making sure that you're always working on the things that deliver the most value for the least amount of effort, essentially.
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess, part of your process, and it's different within the data space, this data science, machine learning, than other disciplines, is the speed of change, how quickly new models and how new theories come up. As you're but you obviously need a roadmap and you need to have that vision of capabilities. How does your team or who allocates some time to make sure that there's, I don't know if it's R&D, but there's some, awareness of what's coming down and how that might fit into the future plans and impact maybe future plans?
Exactly. That's a great question. So it is something I do personally, and I think it's something someone in the organization should be responsible for this, right? Like it's data science and machine learning are still, you call it perfectly. It's an R&D function, right? Like it's still, there's a lot of development, but there's also a lot of research, right? And what that means is, for me personally, just like reading academic papers, like what's come out, what are people doing, just like keeping up to date with like progress that's happening in the world of machine learning, right? Like once ChatGPT came out, the volume of research that's coming out is just been mind blowing. Like very recently, I read this paper again. Once Google released that attention is all you need paper, there's so many papers with the same sort of title formatting. X is all you need. So I read this paper that says textbooks is all you need. So what they did was, it's actually a smaller model, but trained only on high quality textbooks, right? And they found that it outperforms even really large models like GPT-4, right? Like it's so the idea of being able to train narrow but very focused models potentially will outperform really large general purpose models, right? That was a cool learning for me. So then I was like, okay, maybe we can use this somehow, right? Like train a small Llama 2 model to do just this one thing, like fine tuning a Llama 2 model with like data from this specific domain to see if it outperforms generally what we get from, let's say, a custom chat GPT, right? Like that's an idea that we should definitely experiment with, right? So just making sure that you're like keeping up to date by like reading research that's coming out. Another example is just like once GPT-3 came out, a lot of NLP work. I don't want to say like there's so many teams doing like really cool NLP work. I don't want to say their work became obsolete overnight, but it just became so much easier to use these pre-trained models to do what would have otherwise taken a team of NLP engineers. Right? Like it's just there was a significant change in the ability to use these pre-trained models to do things that would have previously taken like a team of engineers months of work, right? So it's just making sure that like you're abreast of changes that are coming, reading research papers, finding out what are the use cases for these new technologies that are coming, and sort of running some small scale experiments. Again, you cannot dedicate your whole team, okay, stop everything you're doing, go work only on GPT models. That's not going to work. But like you can at least find out, okay, let's run some small scale experiments. Let's train a small Llama 2 model with just marketing specific, domain specific data, see how that model does against some baseline GPT, ask a bunch of questions, see what it comes up with, right? So it's just having that like knowledge of what's happening in the world and like being open to like running some small scale experiments in house to see how you derive value out of academic research. I call this generating. It's like bringing information from the ivory tower to the boardroom, right? Like academic research produces tons of value, but to actually translate that to business value, you have to do some tinkering on the side, if you will, right? Like it's.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting because software engineering, the life cycle. Obviously, there's different methodologies of how to deliver, but the more modern methodologies have been around, and there's an understanding. I think most stakeholders, if they said we need this, probably don't assume it's done tomorrow. Like there's development, you got to do requirements testing. There's all those things that have to go into producing whatever functionality to go live. When it comes to data, and specifically, we're looking at obviously data science, machine learning, AI solutions. Stakeholders can quite easily, as you said, you're looking at these these GPT models, look at that, maybe using it in their personal life and misconstrue how quickly that becomes accessible. Because some of what you've talked about, the R&D alone, doing some experimentation, making sure it's the right solution, that all takes time. do we need to, on the data side, because obviously it sounds, from the looks of it, data's gone from, okay, reporting was already complex because it's difficult to translate that in from data to the business world. But now we've made it infinitely more complex because now we want machines to interpret and provide these inputs and feedback. Is there going to be some kind of, at some point, where we can see a level setting of expectations more in line with what we see with software engineering? Because there is a definitive life cycle when it comes to ML, AI projects. I mean, what are your thoughts there?
I think compared to like the world of software engineering, the world of data science and machine learning at large is not as mature, right? So both from like the business stakeholders and from like the practitioners, I think leaders have to spend a lot of time sort of expectation setting and level setting with their business stakeholders, making sure that you understand one, the thing we discussed earlier about the lead time for impact. And the other thing is the expectation that I think there's a company that got acquired by Databricks. In a sense, what they're trying to do is sort of have something like an analyst in a box, right? Like it's a natural language interface to all of your data that's pre-aggregated. Let's say previously what would have been data aggregated into dashboards and reports. Now the same thing is feeding this, let's say, analyst in a box where business users can go and query in natural language, hey, how many users did this last week? And then it just comes back with an answer for you. And then you can start asking more deep dive questions, ask it to make visualizations. And that expectation, the path to actually delivering that, where one, you trust the quality of the data that's coming out because you have to trust the quality of the data that's going in, right? Like I don't think we're there yet to a point where this whole system can be completely automated and trustworthy at the same time, right? You have to have humans testing data pipelines, humans testing these aggregations and reporting, making sure that like the numbers are saying what the user is likely to interpret it as, right? And then making sure that the visualizations that are coming out of this tool are representative. Like there's some basic sort of data visualization do's and don'ts, right? Like start your access at 0, or like don't have use like good language of data, right? Like it's a language of visualizations. Those things would require some human feedback. I think the expectations from business teams to how quickly we can deliver value with Gen AI, to actually understanding the manual steps involved in every step of the way to actually get to that value, there needs to be clear communication from practitioners to the business stakeholders. Right? Like it has to be, and over time, just like software engineering did, you'll get sort of generic expectations of, okay, like a feature of this size, this is how many story points I need, which translates to this many days, which translates to this much lead time to actually deliver the product. I think we will get there eventually, but I don't think we're anywhere close, just because of the complexity and like the changing nature of this domain, right? Like we're not at a point where you can clearly say this is a 2-story point task for data science team. You can, but I won't really trust it.
I like that. Yeah. And I think 100% it's early days. Like you said, in the last year, more research has come out because of ChatGPT, and, to me, there's always going to be a component of that R&D that doesn't sit in software engineering, because no one's inventing a programming language within a company, or they don't get developed that quick. It's a slow process. You do see frameworks in the JavaScript world. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how a model of delivering data solutions will alter, because you've talked about fundamentals. You've talked about moving into more complicated solutions to a full robust solution where you still need to trust data quality and accuracy, what's going in, what's coming out. I think there's going to be different roles. I have to kind of believe there'll be different roles for these solutions, because we're not even going to talk about quality and accuracy and all those things now. But I can't imagine these teams are going to get to be really robust, and we're going to probably have roles that we haven't even envisioned yet as those ancillary complementary positions to help execute these projects. I think it's going to be pretty darn exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're already starting to see some of that with like software tool providers that operate in like different avenues of this value chain, right? Like there's companies that work completely on the data quality, sort of data like the observability of like the quality of data that's coming through. And then there are companies that are doing just like ML ops, companies that just do tracking of a bunch of experiments. There's so many open source tools that do that now, like AWS, Azure, everybody's coming up with these services to do just ML ops. And then there's going to be some sort of, I think, like prompt engineering, right? Like it's going to be someone's job to make sure that it's like, if you give this prompt, you expect this answer, like that's exactly what's happening, rather than like every time you ask it the same question, like it comes up with two different answers, and it's like, it's making sure that like the value of the relationship between prompts and responses in this business context actually makes sense. Like, there has to be some new role, like whose function is to just like ask questions, find out answers, like, no, this is not what I want, go back and change it. And then, like making that human feedback, reinforcement learning system actually work for this specific business context. There has to be some I envision that being someone's full-time job, right? Like they're just sitting and asking questions, getting answers, and then saying, no, go back, change this. And like, which means you have to be an expert in that domain. You have to be an expert in that data. So it's a very fascinating times we live in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody about Google search results, and I'm like, and you look at what ChatGPT does and Alexa does, a lot of it is one answer responses. I go, we've now spent a decade plus used to Google serving pages of results. In a way, we've gotten good. We've developed our own internal machine learning to go through those pages, interpret which ones are good, how many pages to go through. We're going to be shifting to this. If we're shifting to these models where one answer is what I get, I'm now giving up that power, that authority over, is that the correct answer? Because I don't know what the alternatives are. It's pick what it thinks is the best. I find that fascinating because I don't think anyone goes to Google or their favorite search engine. The first result that comes up in the first spot goes, that's it. I'm stopping right there. If anybody does, I'd love to talk to them. But we all go at least 4 or 5 links deep, maybe 4 pages deep when we're searching for an answer to a problem. I think I'm very fascinated how people are going to start changing and to be comfortable with this answer is right. Yeah, I think it's still early. We've only had it for a year, but I look at that and I go, man, how long is it going to take for us to be able to really trust one answer? Heck, when somebody tells you something, you still aren't 100% sure, even though they're an expert. You're like, are you sure? But anyway, so sorry about that. Yeah, that's just digressing there.
No, that's a great point. Like I think very recently, the problem of like LLMs hallucinating, right? Like there maybe a few months ago there was this example of some lawyer using ChatGPT to like write his brief, and it ended up quoting cases that actually didn't even exist. It's like none of this is true, and that this person, without validating the responses from ChatGPT, just ended up submitting like a legal paperwork that was based on cases that didn't even exist. So it's like like in that one answer paradigm, right? Like whose job is it to validate that one answer? Like I think we have to get better at sort of sniff testing the answer and being like, this doesn't smell right. Like I need to find out more. And then like you take that information, go Google it, and like find, okay, what are some sources that are saying the same thing, and they have to be reliable sources. It cannot be like Amir and Vineeth.com say this, right? Like it has to be something that's it's going to be fascinating how this like world of like the one answers and like whose job is it to validate that one answer is great. Fun thought exercise.
Yeah, no, we'll have to see how that I'm excited to see how all that plays out, how financial models change with all that. But hey, Vineeth, I know you got to go back to getting stuff done, so I appreciate your time. All your insights have been great. If somebody wants to reach out to you to just pick up on the conversation, what is a good way of connecting with you?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn, find me on Twitter, DM me on Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm usually responsive, so. They're both good avenues to reach me.
Perfect. We'll include those on the show note links so people can do that. And again, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, 2 things. 1, really cool topic. Honestly, we're kind of getting a little bit of insight in terms of someone, Vineeth has just started this role. He's kind of formulating strategies. He's shared with us a little bit of that process. It's been cool, and another insight. So share this with somebody else who likes the data machine learning space. I think a lot of value. And also, hey, subscribe, comment, leave me a review. Let us know how we're doing. I always want that feedback. I appreciate it. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.